All right. Hey, everybody. Hope we've had a good summit. Thanks very much for persisting, sticking through to the end of the day. So my name's Martin Doherty. I'm from a company called MX51, and I'm here to talk to you about turbocharging your developers with agile security. So if you're in a security team struggling to keep pace with your product development, or if you are in a product delivery team and you want a smoother interaction with security, this talk is aimed at you. So cool. So let's start by defining what agile security actually is. So these days we know the products, software, features that we are responsible for defending is delivered in an agile way. So that brought us DevOps, okay? And so the question then is, well, where does security fit into this process? And the answer is pretty simple, is that security fits in everywhere. Okay, so we in security, we care how things get built, we care about how they get deployed, and we care about how they operate. So we have to be everywhere, but that is an opportunity because we can insert a bunch of checks or generate the artifacts that we cyber people love every part of this process. And it's not just me saying this as well, right? So DevSecOps, NIST also define it in a similar way. So they have this project open at the moment. You can go check it out. They define it just like I have. So cool. So now that we've anchored the talk by defining what agile security is, I'm going to tell you about how we at MX51 took those practices and applied it to product vulnerability management. And as we go through the talk, I'm going to break it into three big themes. So one is that guardrails beat gates. The next is that pragmatism wins engagement. And lastly, empathy generates efficiency. But first off, let's start with some intros. So who are MX51? So we're a fintech scale-up. We create a bunch of different software options, which basically makes merchants' life easier. So we have in-store integrations. So our software makes points of sale talk to terminals, and our software also pulls data off the terminals and other sources of transactions, pumps all that into dashboards that we can make available to our customers and gives them basically what they need in real time, whether it's the health of the terminals or transactions, whatever it is. The most important thing about MX51 and probably why you've not heard of us is that we're actually a white label SaaS. So we typically go to market through other larger FSIs, typically banks. So really what that means for us is we're a small, lean team delivering all of the capability to customers who have high security expectations, and that's relevant for the talk. Quickly about me, that's a big photo of me. I've been on the other side of the fence where in my customer land, so I come from large FSI. I've held roles at CBA and Macquarie, and prior to that, I've been building security operations and GRC capabilities for the last few years. And I'm obviously not from Australia, and I'll do my best to grade my accent as I go. Okay, cool. So, how do you make a startup like a bank without actually becoming a bank? Right, so imagine me, I've just come from a large bank, it's just started, first day of this small, nimble scale-up. So, MX51, they operate incredibly fast, right? So our customers love our products and features, but also they love the pace at which we operate. So I need to keep that going. I can't interrupt that. But I also have customers with those really hairy security expectations too. So I've got to keep the pace going. I've got to help be secure like our customers expect, but I've got to do that, frankly, with a smaller team than I've had in the past. So for me, security has to be an accelerator for growth. And so I then could ask myself this question in a different way, which is how do you get a good security outcome without impacting velocity or culture? So the answer to that is, of course, agile security, which is the talk today. So let's consider how we at MX51 applied that to product vulnerability management. So first of all, I'm just going to define what good looks like for our stakeholders. So the primary stakeholder is, of course, our customers. First and foremost, what they want from MX51 is our products and features. Sure, they do all their security checks, but frankly, the first thing they want is products and features. From a risk perspective, well, we love to talk about supply chain risk in cyber. In this instance, I am that risk to my customer, and they want exactly what I want from my suppliers, which is low risk. One of the other things they want from us is they want comfort around how we operate. And so the ways that we can tell them that we have good practices by aligning to industry standards. So we recently got SOC 2 Type 2, but specifically for product vulnerability management, we can give them some comfort by aligning to the ASD Essential 8 remediation timeframes when it comes to vulnerabilities. The next group of people I need to keep happy is our engineering team, our developers. Frankly, they just want to build stuff. That's what they are excellent at. And really, they don't want to hear from me. They want invisible security. And lastly, I've got my own team who have to serve both of these stakeholders. And for us, we're builders too, right? For vulnerability management, we don't want to have to do track and chase work. That's just noise. We don't want to mark other people's homework if we can build capability instead. So keep those perspectives in mind. We're going to keep checking in with them as we go throughout this talk. So where were we when I joined MX51? So one of the cool things about MX51 is we're a cloud-native organization, and that brings with it an awful lot of perks. From vulnerability management perspective, I don't have to worry about trusting my asset lists, nothing like that. My environment is declared as code, right? So we use Terraform and MX51 to do just that. And the cool thing about having your environment declared as code means you can bake in the security controls that you're looking for, right? So you don't have to worry about the coverage of your vulnerability scanning. You can trust that your agent is present where it needs to be. You can deploy Amazon Inspector in that way. And for us, we use Sysdig Secure. The next perk of being a cloud-native org is that there's just less stuff to worry about. So we use the usual AWS service like everybody else for like data and compute. And also for our container stack, we use EKS. All of those services have managed control planes. So just less things for me to have to patch. And of course, the things that we do have to patch, life just got easier too, because we've got these beautiful things called container registries, which means I can update the image and then that gets deployed everywhere. The third and final perk, which I wanted to talk about today, and my personal favorite, because it's a big thing in this talk, is pipelines. So MX51, all of our production environment has deployment pipelines. And what that means is we can start to insert some of those security checks I mentioned earlier. So considering the stage of development, early on, we can start to spot secrets being spilled in code, or we can perform static analysis. But before we bump up to pre-prod, we can do some cool stuff like automated pen testing. And then before we hit prod, we can check for vulnerabilities or misconfigurations in our cloud accounts. So just by doing this, we're already starting to deliver on some of that agile security promise that we just talked about. So cool. So really cool foundation when I joined, but we weren't perfect. We still had some areas of improvement. So we did vulnerability scans, but we only did them at the point we were promoting to production. We didn't block the vulnerabilities we detected. And frankly, that's because we were too scared about what would happen. We didn't want to slow things down. What that meant is that we had to remediate by firefighting. So we'd either set a fire under the engineers to go do an emergency patch, or vice versa, the fire would be felt by the security team, where we would then have to come up with some compensating controls to mitigate the risk. For the vulnerabilities that landed on the environment, we want to make sure we fix those on time. So we had reporting, but it was on a per host, per container basis. So voluminous, and it aged out very quickly. Those lists become stale in an ephemeral environment. And lastly, we had humans policing all of that, so not very efficient. So checking back in with those stakeholders I mentioned, for our customers, you've got this potential for stalled feature delivery, right, whilst we deal with the escalation of firefighting vulnerabilities. For our engineering team, they've got these last minute surprises, so they're not happy, right? They're trying to close out a sprint and now they have a blocker. And for our security team, those firefights we had to do, that's an interrupt that we also don't need. So naturally, we thought we could do better than that. So we sought to block high-risk vulnerabilities in production and improve patching timeliness, but without impacting velocity or culture, right? And hopefully you can start to see where I was coming with those three themes I mentioned at the start, right? So like guardrails beat gates, Promise and wins engagement, and empathy generates efficiency. So I'm going to tell you how we achieve this objective by following those kind of three principles. So let's look at the first one. That's that guardrails beats gates. So I'm pretty sure the picture you can see is familiar to most organizations, right? The number of people building products, features, and services is typically far greater than the number of people in the security team responsible for staying across that and defending it. And over time, that problem just gets worse because there's more products and services. You want to add more value to your customers, but you're then constrained, your growth is constrained by the number of people on that central security team. And worst case, what can that lead to? People go around, right? So something might get shipped that hasn't had the right checks performed, and ultimately then that potentially puts an exposure out in the wild. That gets owned. There's an incident on your customer, it's an incident on you. Nobody's having a good day. The other problem with these gates is where they get placed. So typically they're placed at the end of a process. So at MX51, like I said, we had scanning, but it only happened at the point we deployed to prod. So what did that mean? The first time a high or critical severity vulnerability would surface to our engineers is at the end, which is more expensive to fix, near their deadline. So this big thing we keep on talking about in security about shifting left, is just literally move those controls left. Let's try and catch things early so they can be dealt with when it's easier and often cheaper. And that's what we did at MS51. So we introduced one of the AWS partners, Sysdig, and we used their product Sysdig Secure to start having vulnerability scanning across all the stages of development. And one of the cool things with Sysdig is that they have this local scanning engine. So we have our engineers in their local dev environment spin up containers on their machines. We can support that too, and we can perform vulnerability scanning that early. And what we did with that, most importantly, is we enabled this common scanning policy. So no matter where you're at in development, you got a common, consistent result. Which kind of leads me on to the big takeaway, which is that this lends itself to guardrails. So guardrails is another term we hear a lot in security. So what is a guardrail? But in its simplest terms, it keeps you on the safest path, right? You do the Bondi to Coogee walk. What's stopping you from falling in the water? It's a guardrail. What's super important about guardrails is that they're consistent. If there's a gap in that, you're going to have a bad day. You'll be in the ocean. And so those consistent scanning policies I just mentioned, that is our guardrail. So let me just walk you through it. So the happy, safe paths for us at MX51 is ideally an image with no vulnerabilities, but low rated vulnerabilities. That is within our risk appetite. And I should say these are all anchored on the CVSS scores, by the way. Next up is like the medium severity alerts. Now for this stuff, we do care about it. We want to track it through to remediation, but still not strong enough risk to break build to halt our kind of delivery pipeline. But then you go into the nasties. So this is the critical or high 7 or above CVSS. These are the nasties that we have no appetite for in our product. And for this stuff, we will break build on our pipeline. And you can see now the effect I'm trying to draw up here is that guardrail effect, right? So across development, as long as your image stays on the safe path, you'll get to that production destination nice and safely. So in terms of the practical steps we actually did to get there, we first off enabled the consistent scanning across all the different stages of development. We communicated that intention to block with plenty of warning. We dealt with all the stuff that was already there, so we didn't have a nasty time when we turned on the control. And we communicated again and again to the point where we were boring. And then we finally enforced the break build. And so where does that land with our stakeholders? Well, our customers, they're now getting a lower risk profile because we are blocking. For our developers, well, the guardrails, they happen early. There's this spirit of self-service, so they don't get any surprises. And for the security team, if there's no surprises and people are self-serving, we don't have to deal with it. So winning. So then you're probably thinking, well, that sounds nice, turning on blocking, but how do you persuade people to go for it, right? And this brings me on to the next part of the talk, which is that pragmatism wins engagement. Or I could phrase it as block, but block carefully. So what you can see on the screen is the MX51 policy in Sysdig Secure. So at MX51, we block critical or high severity vulnerabilities that have a fix available. And this is probably going to prompt two questions. So the first question I can guess is, why is he okay with medium and belows hitting his environment? Well, one, risk appetite. And I said, we don't forget about them, we just monitor them and we make sure they're fixed, but we don't break build. Second part is, I've just built this really nice path with those beautiful guardrails. If I make that path too difficult to navigate, people will find a new path, right? So you've got to be balanced, you can't make it too hard. But lastly, I said that most important thing our customers want is our products and features. So if I'm taking engineering time away from building to fixing security holes, I've got to spend that engineering budget wisely, right? And I want to focus that on the highest and critical risks, which is what this policy steers people to do. So, as I said, we block criticals and highs if there's a fix available. So if there's no fix available, it does go through into the environment. So the second question you probably have is, well, why is he okay with that? And I'm going to answer that one with a question, a series of questions, in fact. So first off is there an exploit in the wild? Second part is, is the vulnerability reachable in your environment, right? Is your software package running? Is there any other contributing controls in your environment that can catch this thing? They're non-trivial questions to answer, right? So what we wanted to do is to give ourselves the space to do that analysis to qualify the true residual risk, right? Because you have to be sure that that security risk is bigger than the risk of not delivering, because in this scenario, if we block, there is no fix, right? So that's why, because that's a big drastic call, we decided, you know what, we want to have the space to do the evaluation and likely implement some compensating controls instead. And so where does that land with the stakeholders? Well, again, we're still blocking our customers. They're getting that risk reduction. That's cool. But now, particularly for our engineers, there's a spirit of fairness, right? So we're not going to give them an unfixable blocker. And lastly, from the security team perspective, I talked about the guardrails, right, and self-service. So the stuff that can be fixed is being fixed. But this stuff is harder. And this is where we as a security team get to add value by doing the threat evaluations, by determining the right compensating controls. So it's where we want to play as a team. So those other two themes that I've been talking about, that's very much in pipelines, right? But then the stuff that happens in runtime too. So some vulnerabilities hit runtime and they need to be dealt with too. And this is the crux of this section of the talk. So empathy generates efficiency, right? Really what I'm talking about here is the necessary evil that is vulnerability reporting. So for vulnerability reporting, what we did is we just considered the recipients of the report, right? Whether it's a dashboard, a BI, or whatever. We just looked at that list and thought, you know what, if I receive this, would I actually know what to do? And just by asking ourselves these basic questions, we're able to change how we reported on things to make it easier to action for our stakeholders, and then actually saved us a bit of time too. So let me walk you through that. So at MX51, we've implemented more relevant, realistic, and actionable vulnerability reporting. And there's kind of three things that we've done here to try and achieve that outcome, right? So first of all, I did say that we report on hosts and containers. So all the instances where the vulnerabilities have materialized. But if you think about it, I mentioned container registries. The fixing action is to go patch an image. So it doesn't matter about all the instances, right? You just need to patch the image. So why, if I'm going to give somebody an action, do I need to give them all the noise, or just give them the one thing they need to do, which is update this image? So we've just shrunk our reporting to just images only. Cool. So that's a much smaller list to start with. What we then considered is, well, is there a new image available, right? So third-party maintained images in particular, they might have a vulnerable software package, but maybe the image hasn't been updated yet. And you can't do an out-of-band update on the software package because you might invalidate your warranty, support agreement, whatever it is. And so for those things where they can't be patched because we've got this dependency, do we mark that as red and overdue and burn our stakeholders, but also trigger some management escalation noise? Or do we just call it what it is and say, we're waiting for a third-party update? Well, that's what we did. We just said, let's wait. So that means that our people can focus on the stuff that can be fixed without management escalation and noise. The last thing we did is that list of images that are fixable, we then prioritized it as well. And so what we did there is we considered a few different risk factors. So one is the severity of the vulnerability itself. And obviously, if there's a public exploit in the wild, that's interesting to us. The second thing we considered then is it reachable on the environment? So, is the software package running? Is it network accessible? And then we also considered the vulnerability age. So this is where we're moving away from those risk factors of the vulnerability severity and whether it's reachable. We then looked at the image itself. How many vulnerabilities in total does it have? How old is the image? And we use those as kind of secondary factors to prioritize treatment. And the idea really is that we fix the risky stuff first, and we also focus our attention on patching the images that give us the quickest risk reduction as well. So cool. So a quick recap of what we did. So we limited the reporting to images, we prioritized by risk, and we sought to qualify the availability of the patch before we handed it over to our stakeholders. So in terms of the outcomes for our customers, well, we're now policing a much smaller data set, right? We're governing a much smaller data set. It's way easier to action. Therefore, we're way more likely to hit those remediation timeframes our customers expect. For our engineers, well, they're now dealing with a list that makes sense to them and they can action. And so if they're able to self-serve similar to before, the security team don't have to deal with that noise anymore. So we can focus on other stuff. So as a consequence of all of that effort, where did it get us? So we said we wanted to block high-risk vulnerabilities in production. And so as a consequence of doing these things, we achieved that. We said that we wanted to improve the timeliness of patching, and I'm super happy to say that we also did that. The number of images that are being patched on time has increased a lot. We also then said we wanted to do that without impacting velocity or culture. And this is probably the thing I'm happiest about, is that we've had no complaints at all from our engineers, and we've introduced no delays to product delivery. And in fact, we're actually only tracking about 5% of builds failing. And guess what? That happens super early in our pipeline because our engineers now know to run build checks early on so they can self-serve, tease this stuff out early and just take care of it, which is exactly the outcome we wanted, because we're now starting to see a uptick in security culture as well. So to summarize the stuff I've talked about, and I had to use this diagram twice because it took me so long to draw, is that DevSecOps is for the win. So remember those 3 themes that I've been talking about, and that's guardrails beats gates, which means shift your controls left and enable your engineers to self-serve. Premises and wins engagement, define the safe path, put your guardrails on it, but entice people to that path and keep them on it. Make the safe path the easy path, okay? And lastly, empathy generates efficiency. So always consider your stakeholders' perspective. If you're going to ask somebody to do something, try and make that as easy as possible so you both get to the outcome you want to quicker. And so things you can go away and try now. Start to scan some of your lower risk environments. Start to surface those vulnerabilities with your engineers. See what feedback you get. Turn on blocking on some of your lower risk pipelines. Start to block criticals, for example. Try that, prove out some of the stuff I've just been talking about. And lastly, from a vulnerability reporting perspective, have a read of those reports or dashboards you're presenting to people. And if you don't understand it or can't action it, change it. So cool. So I'm a little ahead of time, which I guess is good. If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, then you can look up many courses on Skill Builder AWS to learn more about the service or some of the concepts I've described. And my last request before you go is if you could please complete the survey. But yeah, thanks for listening. That's me. Hope you enjoyed it.